Welcome to Shatter.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. I felt it before I understood it. That faint chill between the shoulder blades, the subtle tightening of the air around me, like the room itself was holding its breath. It wasn't a lipstick stain on a collar or the scent of someone else's cologne. No, it was the kind of shift you only notice if you're paying attention, like the faint, creeping cracks in a window, small at first, but destined to shatter. It started with a look. The kind that lasts a heartbeat too long, the one that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. It was at her corporate party, the kind I used to avoid because I never liked pretending to care about office politics. She was laughing a little too hard at a joke from her boss, Gavin, the type of guy who thinks a custom suit and a perfect haircut make him the king of the room. His hand rested a little too comfortably on her arm, her smile a little too wide, her gaze a little too fixed. I stood at the bar, bourbon in hand, watching them like a hawk. She leaned in, her hair falling just so, her laughter echoing across the room. For a moment, the world around them blurred, like they were in their own little movie scene, and I was just the background noise. She didn't see me watching. Or maybe she did and just didn't care. That night, I didn't say a word. No accusations. No passive-aggressive jabs. Just quiet observation. I've learned that rage is a blunt weapon, but patience, that cuts deep. I kept my face neutral, my eyes sharp, letting the slow burn settle in my gut. The drive home was suffocating. She scrolled through her phone, the artificial glow of the screen painting her face in cold, blue light. I gripped the steering wheel, every muscle in my arms coiled tight, my jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. But I didn't snap. I let the silence stretch, thick as smoke, until it felt like another presence in the car. When we pulled into the driveway, she leaned over, pressed a quick kiss to my cheek, and whispered, "Thanks for coming tonight." Her breath was warm, her tone casual, as if we were still the perfect couple she pretended we were. I forced a small smile, the kind you give when you've already made your mind up about something. Inside, I watched her slip off her heels and head for the shower, her silhouette disappearing down the hallway without a second glance. I poured myself another bourbon, letting the bitter fire scorch my throat as I stood there in the half-light, staring at the empty hallway. My mind already moving 5 steps ahead, pieces sliding into place. This wasn't going to be a shouting match. I wasn't about to throw dishes or punch walls. That's too easy. Too predictable. I needed a strategy, a plan that cut deeper than words. Because this wasn't checkers. This was chess. And she just made the first move. Check. The next morning, I woke up earlier than her. The sun was just starting to creep through the blinds, and she was still curled up in her favorite blanket, as if it could shield her from reality. I got up quietly, dressed, and slipped out without letting the door creak. First stop, the bank. Not to shut her out completely just yet. I'm not that blunt. This is a long game, and I plan to win. I just wanted to check our accounts. Our joint account? Still alive, but slowly bleeding out. I smirked at the transaction history, a lavender spa day last week, dinner for 2 at a restaurant I haven't been to. Yeah, it's time to tighten the noose. I opened a new account. Named it Project Freedom. Set up slow, steady transfers. Small enough to fly under her radar, but big enough to build my exit fund. Then I adjusted the limits on our joint cards. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make her wonder why her favorite online boutique suddenly won't process her orders. It's the small cracks that bring down the biggest walls. Next, I headed to the office. Passed by the receptionist who always gives me those long, lingering looks. Got to my desk, fired up my laptop, and pulled up the folder labeled Plan B. Inside were all the screenshots of her late-night messages, the ride-share routes that ended blocks away from our house, the hotel receipts. Nice to know her boss at least picks up the tab. Just as I was double-checking my backup files, my phone buzzed. It was her. "Hey, are you at work already?" Her voice had that false warmth, like a cheap candle that loses its sin after one burn. "Yeah," I replied, staring at a picture of her from last Friday, arm in arm with a guy who definitely doesn't work in her office. "What's up?" "Oh, nothing. Just thought you could pick up dinner tonight. I'm a bit tired after last night." She paused, then added with a little forced sweetness, "You don't mind, right?" I grinned, not taking my eyes off the screen. It was a calendar invite for a business dinner at a hotel downtown. "Tired, huh?" "Of course, honey. I'm always happy to make your life easier." I ended the call before she could reply. I closed my laptop, leaned back in my chair, and looked out the window. The city buzzed below, people rushing to work, cars streaming through intersections. They had no idea someone among them had just been demoted from queen to pawn. I took a deep breath. She thought this game would go on forever. She thought she was playing me. But she forgot one thing. I'm not just another piece on the board. I'm the one flipping it over. That morning, I decided it was time to stop just gathering data. It was time to step onto the board where she thought I wasn't even playing. Office mornings drag on like syrup in cold coffee. Colleagues whispering about Friday plans and new corporate policies. I checked our shared calendar. There it was, another out-of-office meeting. Interesting how many corporate lunches she could fit into a week without a single PowerPoint to show for it. Later, I decided to take a long lunch. Not because I was hungry, but because I had a hunch. The restaurant she mentioned last week was exactly what I expected. Upscale, low lighting, soft jazz, and a menu where half the dishes existed solely to justify the inflated prices. I walked in, scanned the room, and there they were. Corner table by the window, 2 glasses of wine, her with those freshly curled locks and the same dress she wore for our anniversary 2 years ago. He sat across from her, polished, self-satisfied, with the smile of a man who's never had to worry about the consequences of his actions. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water at the bar. Yes, sometimes even water can be a weapon, and made my way over to their table. She noticed me first. Her face dropped faster than a stock market crash. He, on the other hand, just looked mildly annoyed, like I'd interrupted his perfectly curated afternoon. Clearly, she hadn't warned him that her passive husband might be a bit more real than her story suggested. "Oh, hey there, darling," I said, setting my glass on their table, making his nearly tip over. "Nice spot you've picked. Always wanted to try this place." She opened her mouth, but whatever words she'd rehearsed in the mirror this morning seemed to stick in her throat. He just blinked at me, still trying to place where I fit into his little side plot. "You're the guy she works with late nights, right?" I turned to him, extending my hand like we were old friends. "I have to say, you've got great taste. Though I usually prefer to keep my investments private." His handshake was weak, clammy, always a sign you're dealing with someone who borrows more than just other people's time. "Enjoy," I said, releasing his hand and leaning in a bit closer to her, lowering my voice just enough. "Try not to overact, sweetheart. Remember, the audience loves authenticity." I turned and walked away, not bothering to glance back. Let them sit there, marinating in the moment. The maitre d' stepped aside as I passed, like he could sense the sudden chill in the air. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just joined the game. I was already one move from checkmate. I came home earlier than usual, not to catch her in anything, but to reclaim the space. Funny how quickly a place starts to feel foreign when you lose respect for the person you share it with. I tossed my keys on the hallway shelf and noticed her mug sitting on the windowsill. The one I bought her when we first started dating. It said, "You're my energy boost," a cheesy but cute little joke back then. Now it just felt outdated, like our entire relationship. As I filled the kettle, I noticed her tablet on the kitchen counter, screen flashing with a notification. Password. Yeah, I knew it. Not from paranoia, just practicality. And that's when things got interesting. A secret Instagram account. Private, of course. Under a username I didn't recognize. I opened it. Turns out, she had a whole parallel life I wasn't a part of. Trips, dinners, cocktails, parties. Playlists I'd never heard of, people I'd never met. And the likes? All from him. The same guy from the restaurant. I scrolled through a few stories. Wine glass against the night skyline. Freshly manicured nails she told me were for a work presentation. And of course, their hands intertwined over a marble table, captioned, "Energy never lies." Oh, please. Save the philosophy. I locked the screen, set the tablet back where I found it. The kettle clicked off. I poured the hot water, leaned against the counter, and started planning. Not a revenge plan, a cleanup operation. First move. I changed all the passwords to our smart home system, including the cameras. Full access, mine only. Disabled remote access on all her devices. Let her feel what it's like to be in the dark for once. Next, I pulled out my phone and texted my buddy at the bank, the one who had already helped me separate my direct deposits. Asked him to prepare the paperwork to close our joint account. No warning, no drama. Just a click, and all those girls' weekends would be on her own dime from now on. Then I opened my laptop, scrolled through our shared photo album, and deleted every picture of us. Let her see how quickly a history can be erased when someone decides they've had enough. I pulled out an old hard drive, transferred all the important documents I might need for the divorce. Not for a fight, for a clean exit. By this point, my tea had gone cold, but I took a sip anyway. There was a strange calm settling in. Like I was watching this whole thing play out from a distance. Like she had just become another task on my to-do list. And you know what? It felt easier than I expected. The next day, I decided to make a move that would knock her completely off balance. If she thought I'd just sit there, turning a blind eye to her theater of betrayal, she had another thing coming. I knew her best friend, Kate, was the type who loved a bit of drama. The kind who stirs the pot just enough to keep things interesting, but never enough to get burned. She was always in the middle of every whispered conversation, every secretive glance, every half-truth. If anyone knew more about my wife's games than I did, it was Kate. Time to make her part of my strategy. I invited Kate out for lunch under the pretense of planning a surprise anniversary trip. She agreed without a second thought, which told me two things. One, she wasn't exactly loyal to my wife. And two, she loved being in the center of someone else's chaos. We met at a quiet little cafe, the kind of place where the clink of cups and low jazz notes drown out any chance of being overheard. We ordered coffee, and I got straight to the point. You know, I've been thinking, I said, leaning back in my chair. Maybe it's time I do something special for her. You know, shake things up a bit. Do you think she'd even appreciate it? Kate paused, her fingers wrapped tightly around her cup. Her eyes flicked down for a second, like she was deciding whether to lie or tell a half-truth. Of course, she said, forcing a bright smile. She's just, I don't know, going through a phase. You know how it is. Stress at work, life, all that. Yeah, I said, letting my voice dip into a sarcastic tone. Like when she started changing all her passwords out of nowhere. Kinda like a teenager hiding her browser history. Kate's smile froze for a second, her eyes blinking a little too quickly. She didn't see that coming. I leaned in, lowering my voice. I'm not an idiot, Kate. I know there's more going on here than just a phase. And I think you do too. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. I don't know what you mean, she said, her tone a little too high, a little too defensive. Oh, come on, I said, letting a small, knowing smile slip. You're her best friend. You notice things. You hear things. You're too smart not to see the cracks. Kate opened her mouth, then closed it, glancing down at her coffee as if it might offer her an escape. Look, I said, straightening up. I'm just trying to figure out if I'm the backup plan or the guy being played for a fool. You get what I mean. She swallowed, her throat moving in a tight, nervous gulp. I really don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her face turning a shade paler. Sure you don't, I said, standing up and tossing a few bills on the table. Thanks for the chat, Kate. Always good to catch up. As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of her quickly grabbing her phone, her fingers flying across the screen, probably sending a frantic warning to my beloved that the walls were closing in. But that's exactly what I wanted, to make them sweat, to push them into mistakes. Because, just like in chess, sometimes the best way to trap your opponent is to make them think they still have the upper hand right before you slam the board shut. After that encounter with Kate, I knew the real show was about to start. And I wasn't wrong. The very next day, my wife suddenly transformed into the perfect, attentive spouse. She started making breakfast, asking about my day, even suggested a candlelight dinner. Classic move. She thought she could reset the game with a few well-placed smiles and warm dinners. But I'd already flipped the board. That evening, when she finally got home, an hour later than promised, by the way, I was already in the kitchen, calmly sipping my whiskey. She tossed her keys onto the counter, slid off her coat, and approached me with that carefully rehearsed smile. The kind of smile you give a stranger you're trying to win over or a husband you're trying to deceive. Hey, she said, voice dripping with casual innocence. How was your day? Great, I replied, keeping my tone light, almost friendly. Oh, by the way, I ran into Kate today. We had a nice little chat. She's always so well-informed, especially about people who work late. Her smile flickered, just for a split second. There it was, the first crack. She blinked, recovering quickly, her mind clearly racing to assess how much I knew. Oh, she said, trying to sound nonchalant. What did you talk about? You mostly, I said, swirling the whiskey in my glass, never breaking eye contact. About how honesty is the foundation of any strong relationship. About how trust is something you earn, not something you fake with last-minute texts and tight-lipped excuses. Her face froze for a heartbeat, then softened into that forced smile again. She glanced toward her purse by the door, like she was reaching for a lifeline. "Oh, well, that's nice," she stammered, looking down as if the kitchen tiles suddenly held the secrets to her survival. "Yeah, it is," I said, setting my glass down. "Actually, it got me thinking. Maybe it's time we stop playing these little games. Start being real. You know, for the sake of the honesty you keep talking about." Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, wide with a flicker of panic she couldn't quite mask. "What do you mean?" she whispered, her voice a touch too high, her fingers twisting nervously. "I mean us," I said, stepping closer, watching her shrink back slightly. "Maybe it's time to stop pretending and just be upfront. You want that too, right?" She gulped, her hands clenching in front of her, her mind clearly scrambling for the next move. "Of course," she managed to choke out, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Perfect," I said, brushing past her toward the door. "Let's start small then. How about you hand over the keys to our house?" I heard her sharp intake of breath behind me, but I didn't look back. I just opened the door and walked out, leaving her standing there in our kitchen, clutching the keys like they were the last anchor keeping her from drowning. Let her feel the ground slipping beneath her feet. After changing the locks, I expected some kind of reaction. Maybe a meltdown, a dramatic confrontation, or at least a furious text message. But no, just silence. And that made me uneasy. So I decided to check her next move. I pulled up to her office building after work, parking far enough away to avoid being seen but close enough to keep an eye on the main entrance. About 20 minutes later, she stepped out. Alone. No Gavin. That was odd. She slipped into a taxi, and I followed at a careful distance. The cab stopped in front of a high-end fitness center. Definitely not where I expected her to go. She disappeared inside, and after a few minutes, I followed. The place was all glass and chrome, filled with the steady thump of dance music and the software of treadmills. I scanned the second floor and spotted her near the windows, talking on her phone. Her posture was tense, her hand gripping the railing, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. This wasn't a workout. She hadn't even changed into gym clothes. This was a hiding spot, a place where she thought I'd never find her. Smart, but not smart enough. She hung up and moved to the lounge area, grabbing a water bottle from a mini fridge. She looked out the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, and I realized she was trying to gather herself. This wasn't just about the locks. She was genuinely afraid of losing control over the narrative she had crafted so carefully. I hung back, blending in with a small group of guys talking about stock prices and weekend plans. She checked her phone again, tapped out a message, and took a deep breath before heading back downstairs. I followed her, keeping enough distance to avoid being seen. Outside, she hailed another cab, this time heading into the heart of the city. I kept my distance, blending into traffic, and watched as she finally stopped at one of those high-end, members-only spas. The kind that promises personal transformation and deep healing for the right price. I pulled out my phone and took a few discreet photos as she slipped inside. On the drive home, I couldn't help but smirk. She was unraveling. The woman who once controlled every detail of our lives was now reduced to hiding out in gyms and spas, desperately trying to regain a sense of power. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized something. She wasn't just running from me. She was running from herself. And the funny thing? I was the only one still watching her fall. The next morning, I got to work a bit earlier than usual. The office was nearly empty, just the security guard at the front desk giving me a polite nod as I walked past. I opened my laptop, scrolled through old emails, looking for any hint, any breadcrumb that might explain her sudden change. And I found it, the first time she ever mentioned her colleague Gavin. An email, sent late at night, with the subject line, "Finally." The body was short, almost taunting. "Can't wait for this to be over." You know what I mean. No signature, no names. But the address was corporate from her office. She didn't even bother to hide her tracks. At lunch, I decided to step out to a nearby cafe where our colleagues often meet. As soon as I walked in, I heard her voice. She was sitting in the corner, back to me, talking to another woman, probably a friend. I chose a table nearby, careful not to draw attention. "Honestly," she said, taking a slow sip of her latte, "he's acting like this is just a rough patch. Like I'll come back to him once I find myself." She laughed, low and bitter. "He still thinks this is just some phase. Naive." Her friend chuckled, leaning in. "So he really has no clue?" "Of course not," she smirked, her tone dripping with disdain. "He'd rather pretend everything's fine." It's easier for him that way. Less messy. I felt my hand clench under the table. So, it wasn't just about betrayal. She was building her exit strategy while I still held the door open. Her friend leaned closer. And Gavin? He still thinks he's the only one. She let out a small, wicked laugh. Gavin? No, he has no idea. But I'm not trading one cage for another. I'm just taking what I want from him. 2 masks, 1 woman. The loyal, tired wife at home, and the carefree, cunning player at work. But I had seen behind both, and all I saw was a hollow shell. I finished my coffee, left cash on the table, and walked out into the cold afternoon air. My breath visible, sharp as the realization I just had. Back at the office, I typed a quick message to my lawyer. It's time. Let's get started. I've always known that any drama eventually turns into farce if you let the actors improvise too much. And it looked like my ex had decided to add another act to her tragic little play. I was heading back from the gym when I noticed Claire's car parked outside my house. She was leaning against the hood, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like she had just discovered something unpleasant. This wasn't just a friendly drop-by. Let me guess, I said as I walked up the driveway, wiping sweat from my neck. You caught her with some colleague at a bar again? Claire shook her head, her expression tight. This wasn't a gossip session. Not a bar. A restaurant. And not with Gavin. That actually made me stop. I raised an eyebrow, tossing my gym bag onto the porch. Oh? And who's the lucky guy this time? Please tell me it's not the waiter. Mark, she replied, her voice sharp. She watched my face, searching for a flicker of reaction. He's not new. I've seen him before. You have too. I leaned back against my door, crossing my arms. So they were just sitting there, holding hands like 2 teenagers on their first date? Not exactly, Claire said, glancing down for a moment before locking eyes with me again. I saw her phone. She left it on the table when she went to the bathroom. Messages. Heart emojis. Weekend plans. It's not exactly the kind of conversation you have with a work friend. I huffed, shaking my head as if the whole situation was more annoying than painful. And you thought I'd want to hear this? Yes, she said, stepping a little closer, her eyes full of something that looked a lot like concern. Because I think you're finally moving on. And I don't want her dragging you back into this mess when you're almost free. I nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. At some point, Claire had become more than just a mutual friend. She'd become someone who was just as tired of my ex's manipulative games as I was. All right, I said, pushing off the wall. Thanks for the heads up. I know what I need to do. Claire didn't move. She just watched me, her eyes searching for any sign of hesitation. Just don't let her pull you back in. You're better than that. I paused at the door, looking over my shoulder at her. Don't worry. I'm not the same guy I used to be. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. It was time to end the show. No more lines, no more acts. Just a final curtain drop. When you're playing against a cheat, it's not enough just to call their bluff. You have to make them drown in their own lies. That was my plan. It was Friday, and I happened to see them again. Downtown office building, all glass and steel, the kind where the walls themselves echo with corporate secrets. I was across the street, waiting for the light to change, when I caught a glimpse of her. She was standing at the entrance, chatting with a guy in a perfectly pressed shirt. Not Gavin. Not that Marcus Claire had mentioned. Someone new. Another face, another secret. I crossed the street, stepped up the granite steps, and slipped through the revolving doors. They were still there, leaning a little too close, talking a little too quietly by the elevators. I walked up, pretending to check my phone, just close enough to catch their whispered conversation. Just tell him it's another work event, the guy said, his voice dripping with confidence. He doesn't have to know. She let out a laugh, the kind that sounds sweet but is really just sugar over poison. Oh, trust me. He has no idea. Thinks he's still got a handle on everything. I felt that familiar click inside me. The kind of cold, precise calm that comes when you realize your opponent just handed you their king without even knowing it. I stepped closer, slipping my phone into my pocket, then cleared my throat. Sorry to interrupt, I said, letting my voice carry just enough to slice through their little bubble. I thought I heard my name. Mind if I joined the conversation? They froze. She went pale, her eyes darting like a deer caught in headlights. The guy, on the other hand, straightened up, his confidence evaporating in real time. Oh, we were just... She stammered, reaching for a plausible lie and coming up empty. Talking business? I leaned in just enough to make them both flinch. Right. Because this looks like a real work meeting. Especially with that, I hope my husband doesn't find out vibe hanging between you. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and I took a step back, gesturing with one hand. Please, don't let me stop you. Wouldn't want to keep you from your corporate strategy session. I turned on my heel, letting the doors close behind me, their stunned silence still hanging in the air. As I stepped back out into the sunlight, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos I'd snapped. Conversations recorded, messages copied, every whispered promise of he'll never know safely backed up. I hit the speed dial for my lawyer, James, and listened to the line ring once before he picked up. James, it's time. Make sure she walks away with nothing. I ended the call, slipping the phone back into my pocket as I reached my car. I'd played the long game, watched her dig her own grave, and now I had every piece of proof I needed to bury her. After all, when you gamble against a guy like me, you better hope you never lose. I woke up early that morning, made myself a cup of black coffee, the kind she always called too bitter, as if my taste in coffee was somehow a flaw. I sat down at my desk, cracked my knuckles, and opened the folder I'd been quietly building for months. Photos, voice recordings, text logs, bank statements, a digital autopsy of our marriage. Enough to leave her not just broke, but a cautionary tale for every other wannabe boss babe who thinks she can play both sides. I dialed James, my lawyer. The guy's a shark in a suit, the kind you call when you want a clean kill, not just a flesh wound. Morning, James, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Morning. Everything ready on your end? He asked, sounding like he was already halfway through his second espresso. More than ready, I replied, clicking the send button on the email. Just sent you everything. Photos, bank transfers, those voice memos where she laughs about how clueless I am. It's all there. There was a brief pause on his end, probably just long enough for him to smirk. Nice. This is airtight. I'll get the papers drawn up. No appeals, no loopholes. She'll be lucky if she can keep her yoga mat. I chuckled, glancing at the packed suitcase by the door. Oh, and James, just a heads up, I already changed the locks. Twice. Smart man, he said, his tone approving. I'll keep you posted. Just be ready to sign when I'm done. Looking forward to it, I said, and hung up. I leaned back, stretching my arms over my head, feeling the first true sense of freedom in months. It was a strange, almost foreign sensation, like breathing clean air after being stuck in a smoky room for too long. Then I did one last thing. I pulled out that old laptop she'd forgotten about, the one still linked to her secret Reddit account. I scrolled through her posts, the ones where she bragged about how she trained me like a pet, how she manipulated me into paying for her little side hustles without me even realizing it. And then, under her latest post, the one with 1,400 upvotes from her little fan club, I left a single comment. The house you built on lies just collapsed. Good luck rebuilding. Closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and took a long, deep breath. It felt good. Damn good. I put on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and headed for the door. Time to start over. Time to live for me. Because here's the thing. She always said I was too predictable. Fine. Let her predict this. Been through it? When they crossed a line and you made sure they felt it.